So one thing I forgot to mention earlier when we did everybody's introduction. How many of you have been here before and are coming back again? Lots of you, good. So you probably remember our other instructor, Dave Becker. Dave has now retired, so that's why you don't see him here this week. It's not that he doesn't love you. He's just retired and we wish him the best. He's being a grandpa and he's busy 100% of the time with that. So there you go, that's good for Dave Becker. Also, he wasn't here earlier, but standing over here by the tall tool cabinet working on the camera, Michael Falcone is our new instructor who's here. He's now teaching our apprentice program all the way down in the Lime Rock room, and he's been with us for a year now, and we're happy to have him. Small, small world. Porsche is a very, very small world. So before I moved up here in 2012, I used to train the apprentices in Atlanta. Michael was one of my students back in 2007. So it's one big happy family. We're lucky to have him. Michael's a great guy, and we're all better for it. There you go. Good. So, am I yelling too loud? Good. I picked a topic this time, wheel dimensions and steering geometry. How many of you saw my last presentation, right before COVID, with rear axle toe kinematics? Well, I only had an hour and I stuffed into that new tire technology, new brake technology, and suspension geometry. It was honestly a little bit overstuffed. So I've only picked just the one topic. So we'll try and maybe have a deeper look into it without being quite so rushed to hit my hour mark. So here we go. Typical wheel dimensions. Most people, your lay person, your technician, everybody knows your basic wheel dimensions. It's this big around, it's this wide, what else do I need to know? There's a special one that has a lot to do with the way your car feels when you're driving, when you're steering, and most importantly, when you're braking, believe it or not. Your wheel dimensions have an effect on the way the car feels when it's braking. And that is rim offset. Sometimes you'll see the abbreviation still in the native German. It's not the little guy from the movie in the early 80s, but that means, directly translated, it's insertion depth. So, rim offset, same thing. And what we're talking about on my diagram is dimension C. The distance between the exact center line of the wheel and where the mounting is. So that dimension sets up where the tire lives inside of the wheel well. If I reduce dimension C, my contact patch gets closer to the suspension. If I increase it, it gets farther away from the suspension. Now, it also has a lot to do with what the wheel looks like. And we all love, traditionally, not just Porsche guys, car guys in general, love the look of deep dish wheels. Yeah. Right? They look great. Aesthetically, I mean, who doesn't love a set of Fuchs on an old turbo? These are very, very, very not optimum for modern braking needs. How many torsion bar 911s ever came with ABS? 0. There's a reason. Coincidentally, in the mid-80s, you might remember, 944s went from a deep dish on the spoke face to a very flush disc face. There's a reason, because the steering geometry evolved. And the more modern cars, mid-80s, the 959, into the 90s with the 993, of course the 964, and I'm not going to bore you with a historical slideshow, you know your car models. But all of these, a lot of people, the first thought they think is, well, it's for aerodynamics. Well, it does help with aerodynamics, but that's not the lion's share, that's not the bulk of the reasoning. The bulk of the reasoning to push all of the wheel as far out as we can is to make more room to put the brake package as far out as we can, to get the steering geometry as far out as we can, because the limiting factor is where the lower ball joint lives. And if the brake disc is in the way, we can't push the ball joint any farther out. So, What effect does it have on looks? Well, we all love the look of deep dish. Unfortunately, what effect does it have on steering? It has a very large effect on your steering. So we need to talk about scrub radius. And scrub radius is the geometry, the leverage effect that the contact patch has backfeeding on the steering wheel. Now, what do we all love about the way a Porsche drives? We can feel the road. You know the texture of the road, you know how much grip you have. It's a fantastic feeling. The car communicates with you through the steering wheel. But take a good thing and go to the extreme. If this is my driver's side front wheel, and this long 3/8 inch extension represents my steering axis inclination, or if you're traditional, kingpin inclination, this, where it intersects the ground, has a big effect on the way the car drives. If it's exactly centered, that's not ideal, because we have an equal amount of contact patch outside and inside the steering axis, and neither side has an advantage. In fact, you probably wouldn't want that. The car would kind of drive bland and boring, and you know, your average Baysmobile, nobody's here for that. If we give it some positive scrub radius, meaning I have more contact patch on the outside than I do on the inside, we call that positive scrub radius. Old G model 911, original 944, older cars like that. They look the way they do because they have positive scrub radius. Having that much leverage on the outside, though, can be a problem. You know, any good idea taken to the extreme is typically a bad idea. Jacked up, purpose-built off-road vehicle. They typically go with a very positive scrub radius, not that they're looking to modify their steering, but because a wider wheel track is more stable off-road, nobody wants to roll down a mountain sideways. But there's a problem. Now I have an insane amount of leverage. A 4,000-pound vehicle driving even at 5 miles per hour off-road, how much inertia is there? Have you ever tried to stop a vehicle that's rolling at 5 miles per hour? There's a lot of inertia there. So if my tire is rolling down the trail and I hit a large rock, a tree stump, something like that, the tire instantly stops and 4,000 pounds of mass keep going. If my scrub radius is very positive, well, there's a reason every off-roader knows you keep your thumbs outside of the steering wheel spokes, right? Because it will turn into a helicopter blade as it yanks it to the side. So I'm rolling down and all of a sudden I hit a stop and the tire stops, the car goes forward and yanks the wheel to one side. If we stop the tire, it affects the way the steering works. Are you with me so far? Okay. So some positive scrub radius feels good, great steering feedback. Too much positive scrub radius is a problem. Now we have steering kickback. The opposite is negative scrub radius, where the steering axis lives outside the center line of the wheel. We have more leverage inside than we do outside, and we get a similar leverage thing going on, but it's in the opposite direction. This is really, really important for modern cars. So in my notes here, positive scrub radius is the traditional setup for older cars. Especially think of the steering box steering systems, like on a 356. They need that extra leverage on the outside of the steering axis to help the car return to center on its own. You know the term camber roll? As you steer, you get this jacking effect and it lifts the car, and the weight of the car wants to press down on that lever and recenter the steering wheel. So they need it because backfeeding a worm drive, a recirculating ball steering box, needs the extra leverage of the positive scrub radius. Modern cars, however, are running rack and pinion steering, right? It's very easy to just grab the wheel on the lift and rotate left, right. There's very, very little drag there. Coincidentally, some 911s, let's say torsion bar 911s, so 63 to 89, early 944s, they're kind of an oddball in the automotive world because they have both positive scrub radius, like old steering boxes, but they do have rack and pinion steering. So they're kind of in a weird transitional point in automotive technology because we're talking about not just Porsche here. This is the whole automotive world that has gone to negative scrub radius. So negative scrub radius, I'll get this out of the way. Negative scrub radius creates a stabilizing force against the wheel for better steering feel, and it's practically universal on all cars since the introduction of ABS, anti-lock brakes, or further, four-wheel stability management software. Ours is PSM, other brands have their own unique name for it, but they're all doing the same thing. They can selectively brake one wheel at a time because the computer decides you need help. Now, if you recall, from last time I presented, a few years ago, all other things being equal, if we want to paint with a broad brush, toe out wants to change direction. Toe in wants to keep you stable. Positive scrub radius, because of this leverage effect, like running into that tree stump, causes toe out on a braking. Negative scrub radius, because the steering geometry favors the interior of the contact patch, tends to go towards toe in with braking, and toe in is stable. Stable's a good thing. So there you go. That's the same image I had a few years ago. Toe in is stable, toe out wants to change directions. Who here autocrosses? Who here has a dedicated autocross only car? Do you do a little bit of toe out? Do you trailer to the autocross or there you go. So, dedicated autocross car, it's great for going around corners because it's got toe out all the time. And the smart thing to do is trailer it to the event, because if you drive across town like that, you better have on your brown pants. Now, what's the effect in the real world? What is the slickest substance in the known universe, even more slippery than oiled Teflon? Wet leaves. There you go. Wet leaves on wet paint stripes on the road. That's about as slick as it gets, isn't it? Now, what if, funny wind pattern, all of the leaves land right under your left side tires as you're driving down the road? That's a funny traction situation, because on the right side you might have just wet pavement, and tires do a good job of that. But if I have wet leaves, there's nothing in the universe slicker than wet leaves. What happens when a deer jumps out then? And you stand on the brakes, now you have a dissimilar traction situation. That's not good, is it? Or, how many of you have been driving on the road on a very, very rainy day and there's a lot of water in the gutter? And I remember a long time ago, we're in the family station wagon and my dad drives through a big water puddle and my mother yells at him because, why are you doing that? Well, I want to stay in practice so the car doesn't ever surprise me. Sure. But you know what it felt like. How many of you had your driver's license in the 70s? I didn't. If you drove through a water puddle, the car behaved a particular way. And today in a new car, if you drive through a water puddle, it doesn't feel the same, does it? So let's talk about why. It comes down to scrub radius. Now, in my example here, this is a bit exaggerated. Nobody has a scrub radius that's on the inside tread block. That doesn't happen. But I wanted to make it clear. Positive scrub radius has one behavior and negative scrub radius has a different. So if we look at this as driving with the left side of the car on a slick surface, could be snow and ice, it could be wet leaves, it could be wet paint stripes, it's a slick surface. Now, the deer jumps out, you step on the panic button. And effectively, this wheel does nothing. It instantly locks, it's not doing anything to slow the car down. This wheel still has plenty of force to stop the whole car. And we have a dissimilar amount of slowdown on the front axle. What happens? The whole car tends to rotate towards the tire with the most grip. Or as 18-wheelers all learn in their driving school, the skidding wheel leads. Same thing, right? Coincidentally, that basic principle is how four-wheel ABS and stability management programs work. It selectively brakes a wheel to adjust the attitude of the car when you enter the corner a little hotter than you should have. Not that I've ever done that, of course. I'm sure none of you have either, right? Good. So the car rotates towards the tire that's providing the most braking traction. Because again, wet road still has a lot of grip as compared to snow, ice, wet leaves, whatever. Oiled Teflon. Now, that's one condition. Another condition is we have positive scrub radius. And having more contact patch on the outside of the steering axis causes this lever effect, just like the off-road example. I hit the tree stump, the tire stops, the car keeps going. In this case, we've applied to the brake to the one tire, and it's trying to stop the car, and it self-steers towards the right. My first car was a 64 Beetle. I've had 4 air-cooled Beetles. Those are my early project cars, and then 940, but especially the Beetles. And I'm sure a couple of 356 guys can confirm. Drum brakes don't always act the same every time you step on the pedal, do they? We get a similar effect with that when you don't have your drum brakes quite dialed in enough and you get a pull sensation. Very, very similar. Now, the combined effect of we only have braking on one front wheel, rotates the car to the right. We have positive scrub radius, steers the car to the right. Guess where you're going? You don't have a choice. You're a passenger at this point. So the deer jumped out in front of you, you went into the woods. Oops. That's why nobody builds cars like that anymore. Technology has evolved. This is, more than just Porsche. This is the whole automotive industry. Let's look at the exact same case on negative scrub radius. And again, I've exaggerated it, but I wanted to be clear. So we're going down the exact, it's 1 year later, right? The deer caused you to write the car off, you bought the new car to replace it, going down the exact same road, exact same conditions, same deer jumps out because he's going to try and get you again. And again, there's effectively no braking force on the one side of the car. All the braking happens only on the right side. And again, physics are still physics. The whole car attempts to rotate to the right because we have a dissimilar amount of traction on the front axle. But you have negative scrub radius. Now you have more leverage on the inside of the steering axis than you do on the outside. Now the car automatically steers to the left, just the same as it did to the right previously. And combine the two effects together, the automatic rotating to the right with the automatic steering to the left, the car basically straightens itself out. It's still going to wiggle a little bit, but it's way easier to keep between the stripes and shiny side up. That's an important thing, right? Between the stripes and shiny side up. That's a big reason why modern day cars have negative scrub radius. Now, why am I telling you guys about this? Because you like the way steering geometry works, right? What if I changed my rim offset? I have directly affected my scrub radius. And I'm sure nobody puts on other than genuine wheels. If you bought wheels that were not the correct dimensions, you could accidentally change your scrub radius. And that would affect the way the car brakes, especially in an emergency. Likewise, what if I put on wheel space? Well, I got standard wheels. What if I put on wheel spacers? It's the exact same effect. You could accidentally alter your scrub radius. And that's why we have bulletins that the dealers can see, that the technicians can see, highlighting only this vehicle with this wheel option is allowed to have the optional 5mm wheel spacers. Of course, if you're putting these on, don't forget the 5mm longer wheel bolts to go with it, because nobody likes that surprise. A little footnote there. By the way, does anybody have 5mm wheel spacers? Early 997 GT3s with 5 bolts come factory with 5mm wheel spacers. Yep. But for a couple people who do add them on after the fact, as long as it's on the approved wheel size, if you ever take them off, don't forget to put the standard length bolts back in. Sometimes a funny noise comes out of the back axle and the parking brake no longer works because it goes too far inside the hat and causes its own problems. So we have these bulletins that actually they're called a manufacturer certificate. We make an equivalent bulletin for approved engine oils and things like that. And on our modern cars or recently out of production cars, we typically issue wheel and tire manufacturer certificates every 6 months or so, because people are swapping out tires with seasons, winter tires and summer tires and back and forth. And then on our classic cars, it might be once a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, but we have a manufacturer certificate even for a 356B on the recommended tire today, tested and approved, and spec rating from Michelin and from Pirelli both. So if you're a dealer technician, you've got to log into our, the matrix. If you're not a dealer technician, Tire Rack is our industry partner in the United States. They're the ones who handle all the N-Spec tires. We push all this information to them. They have a full-time employee just to handle Porsche tire business. Their website is a wealth of knowledge for a lot of things Porsche related. Yep. And of course, they're going to handle wheels and tires. Of course, all the tire suppliers have got a wealth of knowledge too, but they don't deal with wheels, just the tires themselves. Yes, sir.
On the tire rack, if you go in to just wheels, purchase wheels by brand, and you put Porsche and then your model, then it will show you the correct size for 18, 19, 20, whatever was optional.
Yep.
So it's a lot easier to find out that way.
So anybody who couldn't hear, if you go to their website, Tire Rack, and you input, you just want to shop for wheels, they're going to show you only wheel options that are the correct dimension for your model Porsche. I would further recommend, we all know that Porsche is made out of the best stuff. You got to spend big money to equal the quality of the factory wheels, because you got to spend BBS money or OZ money to get the same quality as a factory wheel that's made by BBS or OZ or Speedline or something like that. So I wouldn't shop for the discount brand wheels, as long as it's in the correct dimensions and made by a reputable manufacturer of good quality wheel. Then it's just down to aesthetic choice. Do I like this spoke design? Do I like that spoke design? But I did have an engineer tell me, we were talking about that exact thing. I believe you mentioned it on your noise discussion. There are some funny things that happen. And believe it or not, different spoke designs can make different brake noises, just because of the mass of the wheel vibrating at a different frequency than another one. But that's the level we're in. Modern day cars are an amazing thing. Everybody's modern day car, not just Porsche. It's amazing how good they last, how long they last, how well they work every single day of their life. they're so good that now we notice those little things. Taycan's a great example. There's no piston engine noise, right? Now every noise is suddenly heard. Things like that can actually install noises even though you didn't know. A few years ago, he's not here this year, but Steve Caldwell from Michelin gave a presentation down in Lime Rock, and somebody asked about a specific Michelin tire on his 997, and without blinking his eye, he goes, that's the reason that tire did not get an N rating, because that tire made the 997 body shell ring like a tuning fork. And that's the day that I learned that, oh, that's one of the other things we check off, that make sure that our factory-approved tires don't make the car have too much noise.
What are the consequences for using a non-N-spec tire?
I can't guarantee the car drives right. The question was, what's the consequence of not using an N-spec tire? I can't guarantee the car drives right. I know that, how many kilometers did he say that car went through of testing? So did the tires. We know the tires work with that car. We know those tires work with that car. If we didn't test it, how would we know? Furthermore, and this is a little off topic from my presentation here, when they start developing the whole project, when the 992 project started life, Porsche AG invited in the various tire companies to work with them because the suspension and the tires are tuned to each other. They're there from the very beginning of the design. Tell you what, let's hold the questions, let me finish. I got a few more, and then we'll open up to other questions. I'm very easy to get distracted. Okay, so don't leave your long wheel bolts in if you pull out your 5mm wheel spacers. Here's another one, and I told Vu he needs to see this, but I don't see him in the audience now. So everybody give him shame. Unfortunately, and this kind of goes back to, well, how do we know? Unfortunately, the only people who know this right now are the dealers. How many of you drive a 9PA Cayenne? Well, Vu does. An early Cayenne. So on the back axle, you are allowed, on these wheel sizes, to install a factory 17mm wheel spacer and increase the rear track by that much. It's on the bulletin, it's approved. You bolt the spacer to the hub, and it has studs in it, so you use the bolts to bolt the spacer to the hub, and then you use nut and stud to hold the wheel to the spacer. And we know they work because they put it in a bulletin, but only on the back axle. Now, you know what else had 17mm wheel spacers? The factory-built Trans-Siberian Cayenne race cars. They had 17mm wheel spacers. They must work. This is a nice transition, because when those cars, we actually had two, who followed the race series back in 2007 and 8 when they were running? One. Good. So Rod Millen won the 2007 Trans-Siberian Rally, the 7,000-kilometer rally from Moscow to Ulaanbaatar. And he drove a Cayenne, and he won, and it was for Team USA. Well, after that race, they shipped both Team USA Cayennes to the United States, and they did dealer visits, and they did Rennsport, and they did da-da-da-da-da-da. In 2007, I was training the apprentice program in Atlanta, and one day I get an email from my boss, hey, you think you can get the apprentices to serve the two race cars before they go back for the next race? I'm like, yeah, I think I can talk them into working on factory-built race cars. So we actually had both cars in the Atlanta Training Center. My guys pulled the wheels off, they did a brake job, they did oil change, they did all kinds of surface to them. That's how I know firsthand these cars were running those 17mm wheel spacers. And BF Goodrich off-road tires. And we all joked about it. Where's the N rating? Because it doesn't have an N rating. Well, not every tire that's Porsche approved actually has an N rating. Some of our classic models, it is just the, we'll say, garden variety Michelin that has received approval even though there's not a significant difference in the tire. There's no need to make a difference in the tire, so it doesn't get an N-spec approval. So the reason I told Vu he needs to be here is because guess what? How many car manufacturers go back 2 generations of vehicle and issue a new approved tire and tire size? This blew me away, because 18-inch tires are supposed to be a 255, 55, 18, and Porsche put out this manufacturer certificate now approving a 265, 60, 18 BF Goodrich KO2 for off-roading. Because we know, since everybody bought up all the G Model 911s and drew the prices up, now people are getting into the overlanding craze with Cayennes. As of September of 2022, we issued this manufacturer certificate. This is a brand spanking new approval.
So that tire size now fits without any suspension?
Only on Cayenne of your generation with 18-inch wheels. 9PA Cayenne with 18-inch wheels, this is a new approved tire and size.
Do you need the spacer?
Not required to have the spacer, but if you do put the spacer on, it's only the back axle as per the bulletin. Yeah, blew me away. I thought that was fantastic. This is also the same tire and same tire size that the 2008 Trans-Siberian Cayennes ran, because they found out that the 55 sidewall was too low profile for the off-road high-speed use. They were blowing sidewalls out in 07, so they went with a taller sidewall for the 08 race. A short 15 years later, and it's a road-approved tire now from Porsche. So, back to the original topic. Wheel dimensions and steering geometry. What effect does rim offset have on the way the car drives? A lot. There you go. Now we'll open it up for some questions. Oh, now we got a lot of questions. I'm going to start with the order I saw them in. Somebody in the back. There we go. One more time. 951, 955. Okay. So, yeah, what name do we want to put on it today? The Cayenne wheel bulletin that I was showing you is for the 2003 through 2010 9PA chassis, early or late, that generation Cayenne. So, next one I think right here, not you, behind you.
Two questions.
Yes.
So Porsche is no longer like online coming out with a very thorough listing of recommended tires. I just went there last week and looked. You're telling me they're shipping all their detail work to the tire rack or the dealer. I saw this online that was very lacking online of Porsche.
Okay.
Their tire listing. I didn't even see my model 997 on that thing.
You're talking in Porsche.com/USA?
Yes.
Okay. I know the guys who run the website, they move things around constantly. It seems like every 3 months I go, oh, well, I can't find it anymore. And I got to dig for it. And I can't promise you because I haven't looked recently, but we historically do list the approved wheels, or at least wheel dimensions and approved tires on Porsche.com/USA so you guys can find them. You might have to hunt for them. At one time, it was easy to find new and classic together, and then they put the new over here and the classic over here. But concurrently, for the last 15, 20 years that I can think of, Tire Rack has also had all of the up-to-date information. So it's not that we've recently transferred the responsibility to Tire Rack, just the website guys may have done a good job hiding it from you. I'm sorry.
Okay, second question, all-season tires.
Yep.
C8 Corvette base model has the Michelin Pilot all season. Michelin makes pilots for my 911. I put them on it because I felt like driving below 40 degrees temperature. I noticed a little bit of difference, but not a bad tire, all-season tire. I'm not going to track it.
On my personal Tiguan, presently I'm running Michelin wintertime tires because it's the climate. And come springtime, I'll put back on my Michelin Pilot Sport all season 4 because it's an excellent tire and it works great on my Tiguan. And we have that tire approved for 4-door cars. Porsche does not approve all-season tires for any 2-door car. It's either strictly summertime tire, 45 Fahrenheit and up, or strictly wintertime tire, 45 Fahrenheit and below, and they're tested and approved summer and winter. It holds air, it has tread. I hope everybody uses at least that good a tire. And as our chassis instructor in Germany pointed out one time, legally, you're required to have tires on the car that hold air and have tread. That's this standard. Porsche has this standard. We hold ourselves to the expectation that you're going to drive the car hard, so we only recommend tires that we know behave at this performance level. Now to you in front of him.
That might be the answer to my question of, if you see, two questions. The first one is, and I think what I think you just answered is, an N-Spec tire, assuming identical models, the N-Spec is a little different because of what you just said?
Depending on the model, it could be this much different, it could be this much different from the equivalent garden variety tire. The Panamera, the Cayenne, and the Macan all have a unique tread pattern that is just for Porsche that Michelin does not make for the garden variety tire. That's the same model. So it could be just a little bit of carcass tuning. It could be a little bit of compounding work. It could be, everybody knows that Michelin brought out the multiple compound tire. So it may have 3 bands instead of 4. It may have 5 bands instead of 3. They don't tell us the exact differences. It could be tread pattern. And I'll go one deeper. Absolute dimensions. Everybody knows, like the old hot rodders, you got your advertised duration and lift, and you've got your true duration and lift, and they're not the same thing. So a garden variety tire that says 235, 3519 versus a Porsche specific one, are they the exact same diameter to the millimeter? Even Pirelli to Pirelli, even Michelin to Michelin, it could be part of the chassis tuning. We've gotten to the point now, how many of you drive a new car, 971 Panamera, new style Cayenne, something like 992, the latest cars we're selling today? Okay. Whether your car has the InnoDrive option, it has the electrical system running that. And today we actually specify, historically it was always a 30% difference maximum in tread depth. Today we have revised it. It's now a 2 millimeter difference, which is a tiny, tiny amount. But when you do the math, and I could bore you with it on the board if you want. No? I'll give you the short answer. If I have a 2 millimeter tread depth difference left to right on the same axle, that's 4 millimeters in diameter. The way that works out with circumference is a maximum of 13 millimeters different in circumference. Beyond that, the car has trouble. It doesn't shift right, the cruise control doesn't work right, the ABS doesn't work right, the InnoDrive features don't work right, the navigation system has problems. And you guys know about in Europe they've had them since the 2017 Panamera came out, the 84 LED full adaptive headlights. Those are paying attention to the tires too. DOT has finally approved we can import the technology. All the car companies are still figuring out how to custom tune it for American laws, but 2 millimeters, greater than 2 millimeters tread depth difference would affect the adaptive headlights too. The way it works out, if it's got a 13 millimeter difference in tread depth, or difference in circumference, then that means we'll call it ballpark 2.2 meter circle, one lap of the circle, one side of the car versus the other, we have a 13 millimeter difference in, because they're forced to run the same distance, we have now a different RPM. How many of you have a 2 meter commute to work? Okay. If I do 100 laps, I've gone ballpark 200 meters, ballpark 1/8 of a mile. How many of you have a 1/8 of a mile distance to work? Nobody. But now my 13 millimeter discrepancy is a 1.3 meter discrepancy. That's only in 1/8 of a mile. Go 10 miles. 8 times 10 and yeah. We end up with an enormous amount. Just in 1 mile of driving, we would have the tires left and right. The computer thinks one side of the car has driven an extra car length as compared to the other. That's the maximum the computers are tuned to deal with. So if a car has significant wear on one side and a brand new tire on the other side, now we end up with a 15 or 17 or 19 millimeter difference in circumference, and all kinds of weird things happen. This goes all the way back to the original Tiptronic transmissions. The classic example is one tire had a puncture that nobody picked up, and it's a little bit down on air, so it's a little bit smaller radius tire, now running at a higher RPM than the other. The computer thinks you're going around a curve and refuses to upshift. But that's how tightly tuned everything is. Not only the correct dimension of the tire, the correct tread depth left to right.
My second question was, why does Continental, the big German tire company, they don't bid on your stuff?
They do from time to time. Can't promise you the Taycan in the other room right now is wearing them, but I know that Continental is one of the approved N-Spec tires for Taycan.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're using them for all season. Yes. More hands.
So are N-Spec brands, kind of get back to that question, are N-Spec brands equal cross-brand brands? So if I buy a car that has Pirellis on it, should I stick with Pirellis, but I really like the Michelins, or N-Spec?
So if a tire manufacturer jumped through all the hoops we made them jump through, because the gist of it is, we're going to bring out a new car, we invite the tire companies in, they decide what the parameters are, what the expectations are. Tire companies go make a prototype, they ship a few of them to Visoc, they beat them on the track, they take them out and do real world testing, they do laboratory testing, they make notes, they send the tires and the notes back, they do a next round of prototype, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Same as every component on the car that we have a vendor building for us. Once we agree to it, we lock in the design, that receives the N0 specification, the original part number. So if I have a Pirelli and a Michelin and a Continental, all three approved for a car, as long as all four of them match, run whichever one you prefer. And all N-Spec numbers need to match too. Don't put an N0 on one axle and an N1 on another. The higher number doesn't mean it's better, it means it's a new design. Guys that were here last time around, we talked about the Carrera GT front and a 987 rear have the same size tire, and Michelin built two tires simultaneously. Don't confuse those, they have different jobs to do. Yes?
With respect to the explanation you gave about the 2 millimeter difference in tread depth and the dangers that potentially can ensue, what that made me think of was, for those of us who have tire and wheel insurance, you ran a set of tires with 10,000 miles. They come out, and I've never encountered this, but I presume that you come out with a brand new tire, and all of a sudden you got maybe 1 millimeter, maybe 1.5 millimeter tread difference. That's going to throw things off.
So the question was, for anybody who can't hear it, I bought a wheel and tire protection package. And we all know that accountants and engineers, they don't always see eye to eye. And that's what you're going to run into. As long as it is less than a difference of 2 millimeters, you're safe. If it is more than a difference of 2 millimeters, I don't know because I can't speak for who sold your wheel and tire package, protection package, but I would guess they would say, well, we'll buy the one that's punctured because we said we would, you can buy the other one to make it match. That's just my guess, I don't know. But the engineers would tell you they need to be within 2 millimeters.
Okay, so just to part B that one question, if this were to happen to me, or let's say anyone here for that matter, I think it's an important thing to consider. What would be then, is it advisable then to change the left tire or the rear tire? You know, let's say,
Okay, if I am going to replace a second tire, and if I didn't make it clear, sorry, we're talking about on the same axle. So if I get a puncture on my rear tire, I need to know the tread depth of the good rear tire to know if the replacement and the good used one are within spec of each other. but that's left and right on one axle or left and right on the other axle. And personal experience, anybody with GT cars, always buy pairs. Always, 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 always buy pairs. The chassis tuning of that one is not a normal 911. We all know that, right? Always buy those in pairs. That's the recommendation.
Does that have more positive scrub radius?
It's not about scrub radius. It's about brand new tires are slippery as compared to well-seasoned tires. And I'd want to make sure I have the same date code on the tires on a GT3. Are we close to time?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Speed round.
I get the N rating, N0, now it's N01 and all that stuff. They come out now with A, B, C. How important is that? I mean, it seems like
Massively. How important is the new 3-digit rating? Were you here last time? Okay. I may have put you to sleep already because I'm a boring presenter. But we did go over that. You may or may not remember. It was 3 years ago. So the new tires, instead of just being N0, are 911s are NA0. Boxster and Cayman are NB0. A, B, C, D, E, and F. 911, mid-engine, Cayenne, Panamera, Macan, Taycan. In the same order. That's why they picked the letters of the alphabet. Because we don't want somebody to put an all-season Taycan rear tire on the rear of a 911. They might be the same dimension. And a tire that's engineered to deal with the torque and the weight of a Taycan on the back of a 911 isn't going to grip right. Likewise, if I put the 911 tire on a Taycan, it'd be a really fun 3 days. And then you'd get to buy tires again. So that's the magic of the extra character to differentiate the model line it's intended to go to. It's truly tuned to the car, the dynamics of the car, the suspension, the weight of the car. Footnote, our cousin brand, I won't say their name, but they have 4 circles in the logo, has an electric sedan that looks a lot like a Taycan, doesn't it? The tires say NF0 on the sidewall because the tires and the suspension were tuned together. Yep. In the back. So, if I live in a climate where it gets down to 43 at night and then up to 75 the next day, should I swap my tires just to sit in the garage overnight? No. We're talking about when the weather is consistently at or below 45 Fahrenheit, you should run winter tires. When the weather is at or above 45 Fahrenheit consistently, you should run the summertime tires. I know from personal experience, the 6 years I lived in Atlanta, I drove my 986 Boxster. It didn't get cold enough, often enough, or for long enough. I just ran summertime tires year round. And there was one very, very cold day, and it hadn't rained in weeks, so we're talking about bone dry. At the time, I lived in the southern suburbs, and I had a 22-mile commute to work. I was 10 miles in. You'd think 10 miles at 55 miles per hour, I would have put heat in the tires by now. But it was a 14 Fahrenheit morning, and my car lived in an unheated garage, detached. So the car was ice cold, and I got to the same traffic light, the same intersection I did on, we all do the morning commute, right? Like, I'm still asleep, I'm in autopilot. I caught the light green, I put the signal on, down to second gear, and I spun the car. Dry roads, summertime tires, 14 Fahrenheit morning. Yep. Luckily, I didn't hit anything. I only hurt my pride. But I remembered, okay, we got to drive carefully. When I moved up here, I still had that same Boxster. I put wintertime tires on it for the first time in its life because that's the proper tire. Even on dry roads, that's the proper tire. Am I getting the wave off for time?
No, I have a question.
Oh, you actually have a question?
What's the biggest spacer that Porsche would recommend for
Any car over the years is a big question that I can't answer, but I did give 2 examples in my presentation earlier. Only certain wheel dimensions, not all, and only certain cars, not all, might be approved to have a wheel spacer. Could be a 5mm, could be a 17mm, but that's only on the back axle of Cayenne, of only early Cayenne.
So basically, only wheels are approved to have spacers, like, and that's it. That's the only wheels you can run spacers on.
Correct, because as we discussed, the wheel spacer is going to affect the scrub radius. The wider the tire, the more tire we're now putting outside the steering axis if we put spacers in. So, like for the Boxster and Cayman example that I gave, it was only on the narrowest tire that we offered the spacer as an option.
So I guess going back through the years, the car maybe had a larger spacer, you know, I'm just throwing this out there, say 944 had a 10mm spacer from the factory, that's basically as far as you could ever go.
I don't think we ever did that on 944s.
I'm using an example of rear axles,
Okay, but not front.
so basically you should only ever put the spacer on the rear, 17mm, and that's never changed.
So you've been around Porsche long enough. You know that we offer 8 billion different options for everything. You can't just paint a clean stripe in the sand. Did I say paint a clean stripe in the sand? You know what I mean. Drill hard enough, you get to something you can paint. The simple answer is we issue bulletins on the approvals. That's got the answer because my brain can't fit it all in.